All right, so what we are doing now is I'm going to be going over the mentality of the culture of Middle English time period, the Middle Ages, medieval, and then also Shakespeare's world to give you an idea of the lens that they were looking through when they were watching Hamlet. I'm just going to dive right into it now. I'm going to share my screen. There we are. And let me go into present mode. So Shakespeare's time, they were going through a lot of changes from the Middle Ages. And it's what's known as a paradigm. A paradigm is the way you think about things, the culture's ideals and values. And there was this huge shift. You can also think of it as a pendulum where you have one way of thinking and then people reevaluate and say, oh, I actually think we're thinking this way. And so we're going to explore some of those different shifts in thinking. One is the way, literally, their view of the world. So if you look at this in pre-Christopher Columbus and that time period, they were thinking that there were mainly three different pieces of land. They're Asia, Europe, and Africa. And this is the TO map for the Terra, which is the earth, and the O of the ocean, and it also happens to look like a T and an O. So that's pretty much their concept of what it looked like. And the ocean, it surrounds it there. The whole myth about people from around Columbus's time thinking that the earth was flat, no, they knew it was round. What they didn't know was how long it would take to sail past the ocean to get to some more land. Christopher Columbus felt pretty certain that you could do it in a couple of weeks rather than months and months, and you would be able to have enough food and water. And he convinced people to take that chance. And so sure enough, yeah, he was able to sail to new land. So after he started to explore, you can see now right here, they've got North and South America. It's not perfect, but just the fact that they can have an idea of what the world looked like without having satellites with an aerial view, I think is pretty interesting, pretty amazing. So just the fact that they had that expansive view now of how vast and navigable the globe was really opened up a lot of different possibilities for them. Also, just the relation of the earth to space. You can see that pre-Renaissance, they thought that the earth was the center, and a very literal translation of heaven and hell, and the underworld of hell was actually under the earth. And you have the ocean of the earth and then the ocean of the heavens right here. So not very accurate that way. And then Copernicus was the one who said, you know what? The sun is actually the stationary thing and we are moving and so are the planets. And that realizing that we were not the center, again, a big paradigm shift. Now, this is something that I think is pretty fascinating and wanting to do a little bit more digging deep into it. The Renaissance, they really valued and admired the classic Greek philosophers. So just like Joseph Campbell, when he wrote The Hero's Journey, or The Hero Has a Thousand Faces in 1949, and then it got re-released about 50, 60 years later with a new foreword and a new interpretation and application. Same thing where they revisited Aristotle and published a book, new edition in 1519, you can see there. He was talking about having 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Center was the earth. Now they were realizing that with Copernicus that it was not, but just to compare and contrast the different paradigms, check this out. he knew that Aristotle knew there was a vacuum in space and photons. I don't know what exotic dark matter is, but pretty mathematical right here. And I find that really interesting. Also, I don't know what 450 BC and 2000 AD is, but that was as appearing in the Renaissance, referencing classic Greek philosophy. So when they realized that the earth is actually moving and not the sun, they took knowledge of music, and music is very mathematically related. There's different frequencies of the notes. You know, you've got to have a certain pitch and it's got to be a certain number. So they were thinking, well, if you have right here, this is called the music of the spheres. The theory was if you pluck a string and it vibrates very fast, and the higher the pitch is actually the shorter the string. Well, would that apply to planets moving really fast? So you don't necessarily see sound, but you can hear it. What if we are moving as a planet and that's vibrating stuff and that's making a sound and we don't necessarily hear it? And what if all the different planets vibrated at different frequencies and there's this cosmological music? Pretty interesting theory. And then right here is another showing the way, lots of circles here, and the way things were constructed within the universe, where there's a certain mathematical and geometrical design. Things called the golden ratio. That is, you can see, again, circles. There's a circle and a circle and a circle, and it spirals in and gets smaller and smaller in a repeated pattern. That, if you overlay this shape over different building structures, different parts of the body, different ways things are constructed in nature, you will see this golden ratio over and over again. Leonardo da Vinci was really big in it. And it's a way of showing this interconnectedness and interrelatedness and really perfect design. So what that means is, you know, you saw that math related to music, and you can apply that to science. And people who studied these things, they were generalists. They knew a lot about a lot. Same thing with Plato. Like if you were celebrated as a deep thinker and educated, they just poured all of their resources into you to be a philosopher, a scientist, a doctor, all of that. So there was knowledge of the body. You were like a doctor. You also knew how to deal with politics. So it's almost like you were a lawyer. You were just a very, very well-rounded individual. Again, round, circle. And you can see here, the 4 different elements also relates to the 4 different personalities. That was the theory that they have. It also relates to the different planets and the body. There's different parts of the body that relate to the different parts of the planet. So again, like they did not separate things out. We are very good at categorizing stuff. Are you a mathematician? Are you a scientist? They just said, no, I'm a learned individual and I've learned everything about everything. So I was talking about the different circles before and the way things were constructed. And I just wanted to show that in a lot of different religions, you know, when we think of the Renaissance, we tend to focus on European Renaissance and very ethnocentric in relation to England. Well, different parts of the globe and different cultures also recognize this. So again, interconnectedness. This thing, it's called sacred geometry. And the theory behind it is that there was this archangel Metatron and very spiritual. This is the Kabbalah from Judaism, very mystical. Over here, you can see similar constructions with the circles and the designs. This is a mosque ceiling of one of the domes. And this is the chakra map, again, with the different circles and the different geometry, different colors, and different vibrations to show that they're in different cultures, might be very different in some ways, but yet there is definitely a harmony among them all. All right, so if you wanted to get a book, this is how you got it, is these were monks who would just over and over and over again, page by page by page, copy the books. It took a very long time. If you've ever seen those fairy tales where it says once upon a time and it has a big O with all the different vines and pictures in there, those are called illuminations. And that was a way to keep the monks kind of interested and rewarding themselves for, you know, finishing up a chapter. They'd start a new chapter with that picture and all those different, maybe like unicorns and gardens. And they could reward themselves and doodle a little bit and show some of the art because it was so monotonous just doing word after word after word. Then came along the Gutenberg printing press or movable type, where if you wanted to do a book, there were these little letters that you could put in that frame, ink it up, put a paper on top of it, and boom. Once you set up all the letters, which take a little bit of time, then if you wanted to make 1,000 copies of a book and you set up page 1 with all those little letters and you inked it up, you could just run off 1,000 copies of page 1. You're done with that. Now you set up page 2, boom. So it was a little bit of, you know, tedious, but way, 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 way faster. So then if it's faster to make the book, it's going to be cheaper. People could actually obtain it. Then you might get motivated to actually read, knowing that one day you might actually be able to get a book. And that's important because now, instead of relying upon other people to learn stuff, you could pick up a book and read it. Fascinating. Even within the faith structure, you had to rely upon the priest or the bishop or the pope to say, oh, in the Bible, it says this, and it means this. Now you could get a copy of the Bible and you could interpret it your own way. That was absolutely liberating for people to be able to learn for themselves. So again, with these circles, they're trying to create order out of chaos. Now that you have the ability to learn things, you can think for yourself and you can also start to analyze. So if you look here over on the left-hand side, that's from Dante's Inferno, and they love to classify things. Now, this was pre-Renaissance, but his idea was, you know, if you do a certain bad thing on earth, then there's going to be a certain type of circle of hell just for you based upon the sins that you committed. Over here, this is called the Great Chain of Being, and that is another classification between God and then the angels, and then comes royalty and nobility, and then just the regular people, and then animals, birds, mammals, reptiles, all the way down to bugs, and even plants, and the elements and minerals had classification. So, you know, how can you apply scientific classification even to religion and in the spiritual realm? All right, this, if you're really into history, you would love the story of Shakespeare when he was alive. Queen Elizabeth was the main ruler, King James a little bit after that, but mainly Elizabeth, and she really loved the arts. She was very progressive. Her dad was King Henry. His dad was Henry as well. Henry VII yielded to Henry VIII. And that just, they weren't necessarily in order. It was just the 8th king that was named Henry, and it just so happened that it was like a junior here. Well, back at that time period, you had to have a male inherit the throne. He married his first wife, Catherine. Catherine had actually been married to Henry's brother, Arthur. Married very young back then. About your age by now, you would have had a wife or a husband and had some children. Well, he died young, and you can see the math there. He was 15 when he died. He'd already had a wife. Well, guess what? Henry married his brother's wife. Sound familiar? So, which was kind of risky that if, you know, Shakespeare was talking about a play like that with Hamlet, that it was basically Elizabeth's dad that was very similar like that. we're not saying that Hamlet's about King Henry, but it's just an interesting coincidence. Well, anyway, when he married Catherine, she had trouble successfully completing a pregnancy. And finally she had a child, and it was a girl. She and Henry had married. Well, he wasn't so happy about that, waiting all this time for a child, and you couldn't figure out what the gender was before. They didn't have ultrasounds, right? You had to wait and find out. He didn't like that. He did, however, like one of Catherine's ladies in waiting, which was like a servant, helped her get dressed and do all that type of stuff. So what he wanted to do was he wanted to marry her servant. The Pope said no, because he didn't even want to marry him to Catherine to begin with, because it was his sister-in-law. So the Pope was like, wait a minute, you want to get divorced from your wife that I didn't really want to marry anyway, just because she didn't have a son? No, I'm not doing that. So Henry said, well, then guess what? You can just take your Catholic faith and get out of England. I'm just going to start my own church. And so that's what he did. And he married a bunch of these women in an attempt to have a son. Finally, he did have this son, Edward, but Edward was not very strong. He was weak, he was sickly. They think that maybe he had like a blood disease or something. And so if you've ever heard of blue blood, maybe it was hemophilia or something like that. But one of his wives persuaded Henry, listen, you've got one sickly son and two daughters that are pretty healthy. You better change the law that women can inherit property and can be a queen and can rule. And so he's like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it. And good thing though, because when Henry died in 47, that's when he came into the throne. And you can see the math there. He was only 10 years old. And for not very long, was he a ruler? Then what happened was Mary took over because she was the oldest. When she took over, she brought back Catholicism. If you weren't Catholic, she would kill you. She was known as Bloody Mary, ironically. And when she died, they think that she had cancer. Then Elizabeth came and she kicked the Catholic faith out. So think about this. In the span of like a lifetime of a person, 80 years or so, you're Catholic, then you're Church of England, then you're Catholic, then it's Church of England. I mean, we deal with Republican versus Democrat. This is your whole belief system. And when Henry got rid of the Catholic Church, he would also seize up all the money of the monasteries and stuff like that. There was like a lot of stuff going on. These were some stressful times, I'm telling you. Well, what gave him the power to do all that? Well, God placed him on the throne, the divine right of kings. I was talking about the royal we, right? So we, meaning God and I, have decided to do these things. So you really need to obey us, because if you didn't obey the king, you also weren't obeying God. So it was very convenient propaganda to have the divine right of kings. So what does that mean is that Shakespeare's world was very complex. There was a lot of stuff going on. It's not like the Renaissance, they woke up and they said, hey, we're not the Middle Ages anymore. It's not like they called themselves the Middle Ages when you're living it right there. It's no middle, it's like now, right? So that title was given by historians to that time period. So the Renaissance came about mainly from this information age. The big thing with the separation of church and state, they didn't have that. We have that today, but you worshiped the way the king worshiped. And also this whole thing of fact versus faith, having science versus belief, and they were all very much intermingled there. What about today is, guess what? We're in a Renaissance too. Just like books gave information this huge big push, we have the internet. We, in our modern society, what we hold in our hand as a smartphone, can you imagine? Like, we have more information and potential power than any king or queen of that time period. So we are living the life of royalty, basically. May not feel like it, but And just to realize that we have that power to educate ourselves. All we have to do is Google a question. You don't even have to research anything anymore. It's just like, almost like fast food. Like, I'm hungry, I want food, boom, right there it is. Same thing. And it's not such a bad metaphor too, because you have to be picky with where you get your information. That's the only responsibility you have, is to make sure that your source is reputable and they don't have some hidden agenda. Now, modern technology knows that a lot of stuff that they were saying from centuries, if not millennia ago, we're now proving it. Talking about different vibrations with musics of the spheres, which sounds kind of out there. Well, guess what? We now have neuroscience. There are brain waves, different vibrations and frequencies. We have alpha, theta, what else do we have? Beta waves. And alpha is very good for being alert. And if you want to train for theta, where it can be more calm, relaxed state, we do that. And interestingly enough, music can help alter your brain waves. The fact with this interconnectedness, we know that if you immerse yourself in water with the ionization, it will calm you and relax you. It's called the Blue Mind. There's a whole book about it. And as far as this interconnectedness with the brain and the brain chemicals, if someone smiles at you and you smile back, we start to vibrate at a similar frequency. We both start to create oxytocin, and we can have this harmony of emotions. It's real. All right, so what does that mean for us? Like, if you just check this out, I think this is pretty fascinating. A brain cell and the universe, they look very much the same. A lung and a tree, what do they both do? They exchange gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, and they have similar structures. And over here, this is a neuron firing, and this is lightning, and they're both electrical impulses. So knowing that the universe, it's like the universe is in your brain. And to have this electric in your brain, that's like the energy of the universe. It's all interconnected, which I find incredibly inspiring. So remember that golden ratio with the circles and the spirals? So you can look right here is the golden ratio. Here's a circle, and here's a circle, and here's a circle, and it goes in, and the repeated patterns. And you can see it right here, almost like we were seeing that mosque, right? You've got that. And the repeated patterns of fractals, where this flower head, look, it's like a little flower head is right here. And then it gets smaller and smaller and goes in and in and in, just like that golden ratio. And look at how the bubbles have the same structure as the, whatchamacallit, the bee, not bee, yeah, it's beehive. This is broccoli here, and that whole spiral repeating, it goes in and in. Ferns are like that, shells are like that, like a spiral of a shell. So wrapping it up, Martek's law, what that is the theory that we are evolving with technology at an exponential speed, faster and faster and faster. So if you look here at, say, the Greeks, not much happened during classic Greek until they were just chugging away, 300 BC. And then what, like, I'm so bad in math, but like 1700 years later, it took that long to have this big new push called printing press. Then after the printing press, well, a couple hundred years later, there was steam, and that helped with travel. And then, well, what after that? Well, once that happened, factories, automation with Henry Ford, and then, oh, well, now you can fly, and look at this, boom, 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 it's going faster and faster. Computers, it took a long time to develop the first computer, and it would fill an entire room. And now you get a new iPhone every year, and apps are coming out. So it's just really, really moving fast. The issue with that is that we as human beings and how we relate to one another haven't really changed that much when you compare to how society is, or to how technology has been changing. And what's also really interesting is who did that are the people, but we are not adapting. I grew up in a very different time period than the students, you that I teach. and yet we don't necessarily relate to each other very differently. And how do we account for all of this stuff? So thinking about that, where do you think we're going to go next? I mean, looking at the Greek philosophers, looking at what it was like in the Middle Ages, and then all of a sudden, boom, these different things with the Renaissance. And we're in a Renaissance right now. Where do you think we're going to go if technology goes faster and faster in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, when you have children, when your children have children? What is our society going to look like? Where do you think we're going to go? How are we going to relate to one another? Will that pendulum swing yet another time in another way? Science versus faith, interconnectedness, how we can get along as a society. May that inspire you. May that, when you start to read the Shakespeare, you'll start to see some of those different philosophies and mentality in Hamlet. So thank you very much. I'm hoping that something that you saw in this presentation, you might want to look into and research and get into that delightful rabbit hole of curiosity about one of these topics. So thank you so much and enjoy.